The indoctrination continues. It's the factory of school and the factory of work saying, fit in all the way. Do exactly what you're told and you'll get a prize. On the other hand, there's this false narrative of authenticity, of social media, of being the next Kardashian, of somehow being this authentic voice that everyone wants to listen to, being an influencer. And that's like winning the lottery. That doesn't happen either. Life on this planet 500 years ago is different than now. The fear we evolved into from generations doesn't know any of that. It simply knows how to trigger fight or flight. It knows how to make us feel like the world is about to end. And it kept us alive in the old days, but now it's a trap.
Seth Godin is a visionary entrepreneur, best-selling author, and world-renowned marketing guru. Known for his groundbreaking approach, Seth has inspired millions to not only think differently, but act boldly through his blog and his books like The Dip, Lynchpin, Tribes, and now This is Strategy. He's built and sold 2 successful businesses and authored 21 bestsellers in 39 languages. How does somebody know, like, okay, this is the time just to grind and keep going versus I actually really need to pivot here? What's the difference?
Is that being the best at what you do in the world in which you live is enormously valuable. How do you become the best one? You don't quit when everyone else does. So that leads to the next question, which is, how do we know when to quit? And my answer is...
The Icons is a show where we learn life lessons from those who achieved iconic success. And today, I'm so excited to be having this conversation with somebody I've been learning from for over 2 decades, Seth Godin. Welcome to the Icons by Motiversity.
Well, thank you for having me. 39 languages, but I only wrote them in 1 language. I had help on the other 38.
Fair enough. I mean, speaking of remarkable, you touch on this idea of being remarkable or being unique in a way that is specific to you. And I think that everyone is drawn to that in a certain way. How do we become remarkable?
We begin by understanding what remarkable means. It doesn't mean standing out. It doesn't mean having a gimmick. It doesn't mean being the only one in the room. It means worth making a remark about. If somebody else talks about you in a positive way, you are, by definition, remarkable. Why would they do that? They're only going to do it because it's good for them. People don't talk about you because they're rooting for you. They talk about you because they're rooting for themselves. So what it means to be remarkable is to be of service, to bring enough empathy to the table, to not fit in, to not buy the indoctrination, but to stand out on behalf of the people you're trying to make a difference for.
And how did you start to uncover this idea or this kind of philosophy? Was there an episode early on or something that happened early on?
Well, in my book, Purple Cow, I wrote about my late friend, Lionel Poulet. Lionel had died in a tragic helicopter crash, and I wanted to dedicate a book to him. I didn't have a book. I had been out of the publishing world for a little while. So I wrote a book inspired by what I learned from him. Now, we can say a lot of things about Paris, France, but we can agree they have a lot of bakeries. They have more bakeries selling bread than just about anywhere in the world. So why is there a line out the door, still to this day, when his daughter runs it at the Poulet Bakery? It's not because he has a gimmick. It's because the bread he makes and the way he makes it is worth flying across the world to get. It's worth bringing to your friend's house. It's worth talking about because it gives you status. It gives you connection. He didn't do that by copying what other people do. He did that by determining what would be worth making.
You've got this way of seeing the same thing we're all seeing, but from a slightly different angle. And all of a sudden we're like, oh, I now see it the way Seth sees it. It's amazing. What do you feel like the world needs to see slightly differently right now?
You know, there are 2 things going on, particularly for young people. One is the indoctrination. The indoctrination continues. It's the factory of school and the factory of work saying, fit in all the way. Do exactly what you're told and you'll get a prize. And we're discovering that indoctrination, with the issues of caste and injustice that come with it, doesn't really work for a lot of people. On the other hand, there's this false narrative of authenticity, of social media, of being the next Kardashian, of somehow being this authentic voice that everyone wants to listen to, being an influencer. And that's like winning the lottery. That doesn't happen either. So those are the 2 poles. And what we have to do instead is dig in and figure out where the system is. Why are we being indoctrinated? Where are the opportunities to contribute in a way where we can point to and say, I helped grow that. That big problems demand small changes. Small changes over time that add up to making a big difference.
You touch on this experience that a lot of people are going through, and we work with a lot of youth. A lot of youth watch our channels, and you can feel their fears, you can feel their hopes, you can feel all sorts of things, but you talk about fear in a really interesting way. You talk about it as kind of an indication that you're onto something meaningful. How have you managed fear, or how could those who are listening understand fear differently?
Life on this planet 500 years ago is different than now. Many people, billions of us, have a roof over our head. We know where dinner is coming from. But fear, the fear we evolved into from generations, doesn't know any of that. It simply knows how to trigger fight or flight. It knows how to make us feel like the world is about to end. And it kept us alive in the old days. But now it's a trap. So writer's block. Writer's block doesn't exist. It was recently invented. It's a myth. There's no such thing as writer's block. But people say they can't write. They're afraid. Well, my friend Steve Pressfield calls that resistance. And resistance is that feeling we get when we're about to do something important. And our option is the same way a marathon runner views getting tired as a symptom they're doing a good job. Being afraid is a symptom that you might be about to do something that involves responsibility and making an impact. And I look for that feeling. If I don't feel it, I'm not trying hard enough.
So it's so interesting that fear, I think a lot of us would try to get to a place where we learn to live with fear, but you almost learn to look for fear. That's kind of a really interesting, almost signal to know I am doing something important. I am feeling a certain way, but that doesn't mean run. That can mean something totally different. And I think it's pretty clear to a lot of people we live in a world right now that's so full of fear, and hopefully that can switch or change. But in this time, you've decided to write a book on strategy. Why strategy?
I think the big challenge we have is people don't even know what strategy is. We don't talk about strategy. We think it has to do with planning. Plans are about you exercising your agency and authority. We make a plan and then we work to make it true. Strategy isn't that. Strategy acknowledges that there are other people, that there are other systems, that what we're thinking of doing might not work. And it's hard to talk about that, to say, I'm going to go build these assets and go on this project, and it might not work, but this is my strategy. So instead, we default to following the crowd, whatever the crowd is doing. So saying, I'm going to go on TikTok and get 50 million followers and then make a lot of money, that's like saying, I'm going to go buy a lottery ticket. And people know that the lottery isn't a strategy. Strategy is a philosophy of becoming. It is a reasonable and rational plan of how we are going to engage with other people's plans so that we can all get to where we want to go.
You wrote this line that the future is like an unvisited city, but we can see it from a distance. And I felt like just reading that sentence helped me make sense of so many conversations that happen in a strategic way, where you've got some ideas, you've got vantage, you've got all sorts of plans, but so does everyone else that's living in this city. How did you come up with that, or what does that mean to you?
Well, I'm not exactly sure where my ideas come from. I think they come from where everybody else's ideas come from. The difference is I write them down. What we do when we seek to be creative, to have an idea, is we make an assertion and then we tell a story about it. I look for things that don't make sense, and then I try to understand why they could be, because the world should make sense if you understand what underlies it. So the opportunity that someone has as they're coming up in the world is to say, not, that's working, I'm going to go do it, but to say, why is that working? What are the underpinnings that led to a line being out front of that place and not this place? Why is that a well-paid job and not this? Why am I more likely to come out ahead if I do that instead of this? If you can understand the mechanics of it, the dynamics, then when the world changes, and it always does, you won't be stuck.
So if somebody picks up this as strategy, what do you hope is their big takeaway?
Well, the biggest thing I'm asking people to do is to find someone else and talk about it. Don't hide your strategy. Strategies are different than tactics. Tactics, they can be a surprise. They can be an advantage if they're a secret. Strategies, we know what Nike's strategy is. We know Netflix's strategy. We know Starbucks' strategy. It's not a secret, right? And can you tell me what yours is? At this famous college that you're going to almost go bankrupt to go to, why did you choose to do that instead of going to the state school with a full scholarship? If you can't tell me why, you have no business spending $250,000 to go make that mistake.
It's fascinating how it almost can start with questions, can't it? Just these really does in lots of ways. And one of the questions I find personally kind of front and center with this is the question of how do I know when to keep going versus when to pivot, when to change course. And really, it's almost fundamental to leadership and strategy. And you touch on this a little bit in the dip.
Right.
How does somebody know, like, okay, this is the time just to grind and keep going versus I actually really need to pivot here? What's the difference?
So the shortest book I've ever published is called The Dip. And it was the first book about quitting, which is amazing because we all quit, right? Unless you're wearing a tutu to work, you quit ballet at some point. And what I argue in the book, first of all, is that being the best at what you do in the world in which you live is enormously valuable. That if you're going to go buy a bagel or call a locksmith or anything in between, who are you going to call? You're going to call the best one. Being third is worth very little. How do you become the best one? You don't quit when everyone else does. That at the gym, lots of people are there in January and February. They signed up at the beginning of the year. But the ones who are still there in March are more fit because they didn't quit. So that leads to the next question, which is, how do we know when to quit? Because we shouldn't do things that aren't working forever. And my answer is, first, has anyone else ever made it through this dip? Has anyone else made it through the darkness and gotten out to the other side? So organic chemistry is a bear. No one likes organic chemistry. You have to get through it to get into medical school. It's a dip. They built it, not because you need organic chemistry to be a doctor, but because they need a lot of people to drop out. So if you know that, when it gets hard, you can say, good news, this is hard. Now I know why it's here. If I can just make it through this on the other side, things will be better. Okay, that's different than saying, I'm going to be the first person who becomes a billionaire making YouTube videos, right? It looks like, Mr. Beast has finally figured out how to get almost there, but 1 out of 500,000 are bad odds. So if that's not a path, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but it means you should go in with your eyes open saying, there's a big chunk of lottery ticket here, that this isn't a well-worn path where I get through a dip and then I'm going to be fine. This is a really difficult path that's probably not going to get me to where I want to go.